Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here talking about how to start a global community when you're all alone and have no budget. Last night, I was talking with Dirk, our awesome stage manager, about what I was going to talk about today. And when I said the title, he said, quote, "You're my spirit animal." And so I hope similarly that this is a topic that will speak to a bunch of you. So I work for a community called Makesense, which is a global community of citizens around the world who organize open events to get people involved in the causes they care about, social and environmental causes. And I started the community in the Philippines, moved to India to do the same, and now support it globally from France. I first started at Makesense about 4 years ago. At that time, I was living in the Philippines, and I moved from Cebu to Manila to get this community started in Asia with the goal of building chapters across the region. And I was excited about this new role, as evidenced as this very enthusiastic first picture of me with our old branding. But I had a few challenges. One is that I knew almost no one in Manila, since it was a new city and I was the only one from the team based over there. 2, I had almost no budget to build this community with. And 3, even if I'd had budget, I'm pretty sure I didn't even know how to build a community. Beyond that, this was an in-person, offline community that we were talking about, meaning that my goal was to motivate hundreds of people across a very diverse region to give their free time to a community that they'd probably never heard of. So I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed and unsure about how this was going to go. But now I can stand up here 4 years later and tell you that Makesense is currently a community, as she said, with 100 offline chapters and 100,000 people who have been involved. The other thing I can tell you is that if you're interested in being offline and going global, that you can absolutely do it. Because I believe that building an offline global community is actually easier than you think. Although if you, like me, have struggled to identify ambassadors, to get people to come to your events, to answer the same question over and over again, then I'd like to share what we did in Asia with the hopes that hopefully it will be helpful for you as well. And Makesense had actually launched a couple years earlier with co-founders Christian and Layla, who at the time were also pretty much alone without budget, although equally enthusiastic. And at that time, there were even fewer learning resources for community builders. So how do you build a roadmap? What is our plan going to look like was hard to know. And so all of us at the beginning, what we had to rely on if we didn't have a roadmap and we didn't have budget was what we had available. And that came down to, quite simply, our powers of observation, our emotional intelligence, and our intuition. We also took a lean approach in everything that we did and looked for members to help us out simply because we didn't have the option to do otherwise. Several years later, we started consulting with different organizations who wanted to similarly grow offline communities. These organizations had more resources than we did, and so we were surprised to discover at first that they didn't necessarily make fewer mistakes than us, and in fact, frequently more. And this seems to come down to approach. We've seen companies that have more resources to invest at the beginning can fall into a trap of relying too much on money and not enough on these qualities like intuition or leaning on members. Similarly, they can also look to shortcut some of these testing and iterating processes, looking instead to start bigger and faster, but because of that can face instability a little bit down the road. And so we've come to discover that perhaps our initial situation, as much of a struggle as it felt like at the time, may have been the best accidental gift we could have given ourselves as a community and a community team, seeing that today we're not only stable, but also scaling. And so we've looked to break down what actually works, and it's from this that I'll be sharing the five of the most important tips that have been really essential for us to get where we are today. I think that some of these tips won't necessarily be earth-shattering, because in my experience, offline community really is intuitive. And I think if it's intuitive, then it's probably right. And with that, a first intuitive tip is to start with a clear purpose. So when I arrived in Manila, I was desperately trying to get anyone involved in the community, and I felt a little reluctant and hesitant when I'd pitch, because I felt like I was pushing them to give their free time to help me out. And yet, the ironic thing is that I'd been a volunteer before I was an employee, and I loved giving my free time to Makesense, and it didn't feel pushy when people asked me. And that was because I felt like I was making a difference when I was involved. And so I realized when I was able to connect to that and think beyond my personal business objectives, which was setting up Makesense in Asia, specific targets on that, which were important, but rather connecting to the bigger picture of what I was trying to do, our purpose that makes sense of creating an inclusive and sustainable society, it was easier for me to motivate volunteers and also to be more authentic, because this was something I believed in. And even if you're not an impact organization, your community's purpose should be bigger than your business's purpose. Because offline ambassadors might help you to increase sales of your product or your service, but that's probably not what's going to motivate them to get offline. So what's something bigger than that that everyone can connect to? In studying our community, we found that the 3 main reasons people come are to create impact, to meet other people, whether that's personal for their network, or personal in terms of friends, or professional for their network, and also to learn. And some of these might also ring true for your community and is something that you could incorporate into your purpose. And despite this, organizing the first events in Manila was still a little bit daunting. I'd reached out to partners to help spread the word. I'd sent invitations, but I remember thinking just, what if I find myself straight up completely alone at this event at the beginning, which I see some nodding heads. And so what I did was just very instinctive. I reached out to my friends and said, will you please come to my event, so that worst case scenario, I know at least 2 people who are there. And it didn't seem like a real professional tactic to build a community, and more a desperation thing, because often we'll imagine a launch event that's big, that's flashy, that shows that our community is here. And yet, what seems to work is actually this instinctive reaching out to people individually. And this is my next tip, which is to focus on the one-on-one. And so when I say one-on-one, I mean quite simply a conversation and building a personal relationship. But I think this is one of the most powerful tools that we have as community builders. And I found that an effective one-on-one to get someone into a community or to take action includes 3 main things. The first is active listening. So although I'd always pitch Make Sense, most of my talk would be listening to the other person, understanding them. What are their interests? What are their fears, their needs? So that by the time I did pitch, I knew what they were looking for, and it was going to be more relevant. Beyond that, this also gave me really great insight into what people wanted in the community, and I'll touch on that in a moment. A second thing was to have a clear call to action. So like I mentioned at first with these kind of reluctant requests, I would say things along the lines of, well, if this sounds interesting to you, don't hesitate to get back to me and let me know. Because I didn't want to be pushy, I wanted to be chill. But chill actually means that I was giving them the responsibility to not only figure out how to get involved, but then to reach back out to me. And that should have been my job. That literally was my job. And there's a lot of ways to get involved in the community, and it can be overwhelming and confusing. And beyond that, I'd have people telling me things like, well, that sounds really interesting, but I don't know if I'm experienced enough. I think I'm too young. This feeling of imposter syndrome. And so that's why a third really important component was to make the person in front of me feel special and capable. So I'd always say something concrete like, I've seen you speak, and I think you'd be a great facilitator. This is why I'm reaching out to you. So that way, they're more likely to say yes. And beyond that, if I do have a relevant reason to reach out to them, it's also more likely to go well, whatever action, and they're more likely to stay involved. So you might be hearing this and thinking, okay, that sounds good, but doesn't that take a lot of time? And the answer, quite frankly, is yes, it does. There's no way around it. It does take a lot of time. But I am really convinced that this is one of the best investments that you can make in the early stages of a community that you're trying to grow offline. And one of the main reasons for that is that this is what's going to create a fiercely loyal base of ambassadors who are going to help you build your community. So this picture here is from our first ever Make Sense Philippines Ambassador Retreat. We had fun, we did some bonding activities, but most of the time we co-constructed the strategy for Make Sense Philippines, how to position ourselves, what partners to reach out to. So phrased otherwise, what this was a group of volunteers spending their weekend to help me do my job, which is just unbelievable. But when you think about it, this is what we should be doing as community builders, is as much as possible empowering people to help us, because that's the way we spread. As much as we do in a single day, there are physical limits in the universe to how much we can do and how many places we can be at once. And so having ambassadors to help us do that is a really smart growth strategy. Another benefit is being able to grow. And for this, for example, a girl in Cebu reached out to me. We got to know each other, she was interested in Make Sense, and launched a chapter over there. The same thing happened in other cities, and Make Sense started to spread across the region. Now, that's useful because I'm not in Cebu, so she can start it there. But beyond that, a local Cebuana knows Cebu better than me. Who are the best partners to reach out to, good venues, what issues should we focus on locally? And so, for example, for Minty in Ho Chi Minh City, that was food security. But Prashant in Agra, India, thought waste was more important locally. So not only were we in more places, but when we started there, we were more likely to be successful and impactful. Now, only a certain percentage of people will invest this time in will become these super ambassadors who will build strategy and start chapters. And even with that, it would have been so worth it. But as an added benefit, these conversations will also help you understand what members want from your community. For example, in the Philippines, I learned that traffic is terrible on Fridays, so to understand roadblocks is really important of how I organize events, or that it's a very fun-oriented country. It's more fun in the Philippines. And so for that, we made sure to always include games. So we take the same formats as other places in the world, but make them more fun, even more interactive, and make sure we have fun activities, Christmas parties, celebrating volunteers. My third tip will be a short one, but it's a necessary ingredient for everything that I just mentioned to work, and that's to trust your members. Because as much as you can motivate them to get involved, if you don't really let them take responsibilities, there's little that they can actually do. And this is a good reflex that Christian, the co-founder of makesense, had at the beginning. So you'll see a picture from 2011 that lists Felix as the co-founder of makesense London. Now, Felix is not actually a co-founder of makesense, but the fact that he was treated as an equal, that he was recognized for his efforts, and that he was given the possibility to be a leader and actually make decisions in the organization was essential for him to actually invest time to make makesense London a success. And turning over big responsibilities to volunteers can be scary because they're not part of the full-time team. We don't know their commitment or how well we'll do it. But you can start with smaller engagements because trust goes both ways. And as you get to know them, they can take on more and more. And it's also extremely motivating for volunteers to see upward mobility in a community because they come for one experience, but they want to feel like they're still learning and that they're growing. And so, for example, Marvin, who's part of the makesense Manila community, he started by organizing a small workshop with someone else. From there, more workshops, helped with a big retreat, and now he's on the international board, community board of makesense, which serves as an advisory board to our employees. And so Marvin has stayed involved for the past 4 years because every year he's getting something new out of it. The fourth tip I'd like to share is to adopt a lean approach. And by lean, I mean to try to fail as quickly as possible and to learn from it and to make changes. Because the goal here is to minimize the cost and impact of failure, which will inevitably arise. That being said, we did make this mistake early on when we invested in a community platform. It doesn't look like much, but at the time it was pretty cool, called makesense.org. And the goal was to create our offline experience online, so our creative brainstorming sessions. And it didn't really work because we realized that people weren't looking for the same thing online that they were looking for offline. And we'd invested time and money to make this happen, and it just really was not used at all. So we took a different approach, and we started listening to what the actual needs and pain points of our members were. So for example, as a pain point, we noticed that our shared Google Drive with thousands of people was starting to become a huge mess, and people couldn't find the resources they needed to organize events. So my coworker Solen and I spent 2 days building a really simple Google site that was not particularly beautiful, but helped us see, would this be more useful for people? Can they find the documents? Is this something we want to invest in? From there, this test site became a real site, which we've iterated multiple times. And what we've realized is that our online experience needs to support the offline experience, whatever they can't access. So how can they more easily organize their events, check in people at events? And so that's what we've started building now. We take the same design approach for offline events as well, because we do a lot of in-person meetups that we want to spread all over the world. So for that, we do a process that we call me, we, they. As a first step, if I want to test a new event, I'm going to design it, and then I'm going to run it myself. I'm going to run it multiple times, and I'm going to have clear objectives. What is it I want to happen from this event? And is it reaching the objectives or not? Each time, I'll make small changes and say, OK, I'm going to facilitate differently, structure differently. Will it work better? What I'm trying to get at in this first step is a recipe for a really great participant experience. And once I have that, to spread it. But I'm not going to immediately spread it because the second step I need to do, is to co-organize it with someone else. Because I need to see what worked well because I know my organization really well and my own brain really well. And where does someone else get stuck trying to organize it? So in the second step, what I'm trying to get is a recipe to organize the event really easily. Once I have that, it's really easy to open the doors for any number of people to organize this event by themselves. And for that, all you have to do is to build the tools to make that as easy as possible. So this is simply a design process. And so we're looking to have a great participant experience, a great organizer experience, and then have this happen all over the world as much as possible. And in terms of support tools, that's when you can start looking at manuals, forums for organizers, videos. And this is something we'll often focus on a little bit too early because we first want to make sure the event is great and that it's easy to organize. And the goal is then to help people do it as autonomously as possible. And this approach is not only for early stage communities, it helped in the beginning to start testing events, but also because of this mindset, that's what's helped us go from 2 events a week in our Paris chapter to now 2 events a day as we start to scale. Another part of our scale, another reason for our scale, is also because of optimizing our events when relevant. So there are certain things where you're gonna invest a lot of time, like getting to know people in one-on-one since you need that confidence, or testing an event multiple times yourself where you need to understand it. But there are other times where you're not necessarily using your time very well. With me and my team at the beginning, for example, that was a lot of conversations about how to start Make Sense in your city. I would do a ridiculous number of Skypes saying the same thing, the history of Make Sense, how to recruit volunteers, etc. And it sounds obvious now, but the day that we realized that what we had to do was to just group all of these people together and share the information on a call or formalize it into content was completely revolutionary for us. And we saved a lot of time, but beyond that, that was also helpful to foster peer-to-peer learning. And now, several years later, this is still the go-to way to start a Make Sense chapter, and the reasons why we now have 11 chapters in the Philippines. But we also use this online learning for offline action model for nearly everything in the community. That could be how to run a chapter, that could be to learn about a specific cause, such as waste, and we'll also help partners to do the same. The same logic applies offline too. Training in batches as a concept is fantastic, as I said, for peer-to-peer learning, but also for a sense of community. And this is how the initial subgroups of Make Sense Manila formed, which led to the long friendships in the community. We're now at a stage where we're investing more in digital tools because we really understand the needs and uses in our community, because we've validated that use enough times. We can tell that our lives are much too difficult without something, so now we'll invest or we'll build it ourselves, tools such as Intercom or Zapier. For what we're building, we're looking really at event organizing, because that's the core of our community. So how can you find events, look at attendees, check them in? And this is linked to a backend for us, an Airtable, where we can track the number of events, the organizers, and look at data like how many first-time participants are coming a second time, where's the drop-off between the number of events that people organize. But that's because we're at a stage where we can do things with this data, and we understand what the needs are. And tools can be as simple as email templates. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of optimization of your time, because we're always going to be valuable as community builders. Spreading love of our community, enthusiasm, but where we're not valuable are things that can happen automatically. And so responding to the same questions over and over again that were a standard set of FAQs, there's always an easy solution for that. These tips now seem pretty self-evident to me, but we discovered all of them through trial and error. Because we really had no choice other than to be driven by and communicate a clear purpose, to look for volunteers to help us do our job, to trust them to take real responsibilities, and to operate in a lean and optimized way. Some of you might have not had to do this, but I would really encourage you to test these methods, because this approach, I think, can be really helpful to either starting offline or scaling your community. In this job, there are some jobs where a strategic role is considered more superior, I'd say, to an operational role. And I think in community, we have the benefit, the privilege to be able to do both. All of our teams will split their time between organizing events and supporting our community, and then building strategy and supporting partners. And this is because to understand the community, you really have to be part of it and to do things yourself. So that means that the tips I'm sharing do require you to actually do, to be a little bit tenacious, to put yourself out there, and to be open to the possibility of making mistakes. But I think that's part of what makes our jobs so full of learning and rich as well. And you will make mistakes in the job, but as much as you trust your community, be sure to trust yourself, because you are also here for a reason. You too have powers of observation, emotional intelligence, and intuition. And it's likely the case that there are already things in your community that you can leverage, that there are people who would be really excited to take on roles with very little encouragement, or easy ways that your community, at least subsections of it, can meet offline. So for that, keep your eyes open, follow what people are interested in, encourage them to get involved, trust them to try, and test things in a lean way. As I said, it won't always work, and you'll make mistakes, like I did, and like I'll continue to do. But what you're also doing is creating moments for your members to meet each other in real person, to have genuine connections, and to potentially have life-changing experience. And I just think, how incredible is it that that's our job? Thank you.